Hey media, we need a rewrite. I'm Erin Trafford, and this is The Fourth Draft. Welcome back in. Happy to have you here for part 2 of what will be a few parts, where we're talking about the new Canadian bill C-18. And today, as has been habitual since I launched The Fourth Draft, is our team Eavesdrop. So I put this to our team. I said, what is C-18 really doing in the market? How is it making you feel? How are people reacting to this bill? And if you're just new to this whole idea of C-18 and what it means and what it is, I will give you a little bit of the snippet version. So back in the summer, I mean, this has been going on for years in consultations with the government. They've been threatening to do this for a very long time. Nobody thought it was actually going to happen. And in the summer of 2023, our worst fears were realized when the Canadian government effectively entered into what can only be described as a game of chicken with Facebook, aka Meta, so Instagram, Facebook, and Google. And they wanted Facebook and Google to absorb unmitigated financial liabilities in order to maintain their presence in the Canadian market when it comes to putting news content on their platforms. And Facebook just said, screw you, we're not doing it, and effectively removed all news and media content from their platforms. The ripple effect has been significant. And if you haven't listened to my solo episode, I got a bit heated and I explained how I'm feeling about it and what I'm seeing happen and how I think this is going to play out. So you can go back and listen to that after you've listened to this. But I put this whole idea of what is C-18 doing to the team. I dropped it into the middle of our team meeting, and here is what they had to say. So I did this week's episode last week on Friday, after Jamie and I had a morning meeting and chatting with a couple new colleagues in Halifax. And these are women who, I don't know, Jamie, what would you say? Like, they're paying attention. Like, I feel like they're paying attention. And they still had no sweet clue or understanding of C-18 and what it actually meant. And it surprised me in the sense that we're so far into it, and I think the general public doesn't still fully appreciate what has happened and what's going to happen if it keeps persisting. And I think this builds on a little bit of the conversation I had with Matt Kundle on his Sound Off podcast. I don't know if you guys had a chance to listen to that, but in the second half of the episode, we really got into the, what is the doomsday scenario and how close are we to the doomsday scenario with C-18 and C-11? And I just wondered, have you guys experienced that same thing where your friends or your colleagues or your neighbors or whatever, really don't get it?
Not only do they not get it, but when I start talking about it, it's this sour cream glaze just comes over their face and their eyes. And it's just it's too much to understand, too much to absorb, too much to think about what it could mean. I was excited to see that question because that happened to me at dinner on Friday night.
What happened?
They were asking me about it. The friends that I was with were asking me about, particularly about ECHO and what that all means and how it's intertwined. And that's what I saw. It was just there was a veil that just came down that almost it tuned out. And maybe that's a bigger thing that's happening with so many things going on in the world. But yeah, I felt then myself kind of be okay. And I started to back away from the conversation because it wasn't getting the response that I expected it to, I guess.
I mean, not just other things going on in the world, but they're probably more worried about, like, never mind that. I'm worried about how much I'm spending on groceries and my bills and taking, my mortgage. And maybe we're even thinking about moving elsewhere where it's cheaper. Like, there's things closer to home that are even more top of mind and more in the moment and immediate concerns, I guess, than this vague idea of what C-18 means or what it will mean, what it does mean. I don't know.
I
Does
find
it?
people default to blaming the media for everything. Like it's just,
Well, that
it's, well, if you didn't do this and you didn't do fake news, and it's like all the media companies are big billionaire companies anyways, and you're like, so you don't understand it then. Like that's what I get from all of that. But it always defaults to the media needs to stop whining. And then I'm like, I try to do what Jamie said. I try to explain things, and then I realize like they've tuned out. They no longer want to hear what I have to say.
Do you think it's because we're so used to like what I want to call like a bilateral debate where it's easy to pick a side and blame someone, and C-18 doesn't have a side to blame really for the general public? Like they don't know who to blame for this. So they're like, well, then it's too complicated to understand.
So where would they find out anything about C-18?
Well, this is where I'm coming back to. So I'm like, the question I guess I'm asking is like, whose fault is it, to what Mike just said, that there's other things on their mind and they're focused on their groceries and their mortgage and they're not worried about C-18? It's like all of a sudden news disintegrated from their purview and they either didn't notice or don't care. And I don't know which reality is worse.
With the exception of the broadcast dialogue piece that you circulated last week, I have seen nor heard nothing. There's not a whisper about the Ottawa news station shutting down, the radio station shutting down as of 1:00. Was it Friday last week?
Yeah.
There was no ripple in the force at all.
Nothing.
No
I saw one
disturbance.
post from a former broadcaster who worked there, and he was like, well, at least better to whatever. Like, at least I have a weekend now. Like, it was very unceremonious that one of the largest news talk stations in the nation's capital just closed.
And it's not like there isn't news in Ottawa. It's
Yeah.
not like, and Rogers cited diminishing audiences and revenues. Okay. Well, you can't blame that on Facebook.
No.
Right? You can't blame that on Google. So there's a whole lot going on here where we're just watching local news, local media disintegrate. And that's a major market in this country.
Mm-hmm.
No, next to no conversation whatsoever about it. So I come back to my question is, where would anybody in this country find out anything about C-18? Because the news doesn't really cover it. The news that is out there is not talking about C-18, except that, well, there's PSAs on the radio station. If you get your Canadian news from Facebook or Instagram, time's run out. Make sure you load our app so you can, watch CTV News or whatever it happens to be.
Can we just talk about that for a second? Can we just pause there for a second? Because like everybody on this call is just like has either like a shit eating, I know this is the dumbest thing grin, or we're shaking our heads. Because I need to point out, when I'm driving my car to pick up my screaming toddler at daycare and I hear that ad, I am not whipping out my phone to download that app. Can we just talk about how they're missing the entire point?
Yeah, entirely.
Like, okay, so back to my original question. How do we feel? Jamie says she feels, I'm putting words in your mouth, Jamie, but confirm, uncomfortable and like we want to blend in with the wall. Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I'm like, I'm tired of being the tip of this spear.
Well, and I mean, coming from my position, I don't even have the background to fully be able to appreciate what's going on. But when you say where are people finding out about what's going on, I guess maybe it's over tacos at dinner by someone who maybe kind of half partially knows something about what's going on. But otherwise, it's a tough conversation to broach because it's so complicated, I think.
Well, it's not complicated. It's shitty policy. It's shitty politics. It's short-sightedness at the level of the CRTC. It's the big mobile companies that are running the news divisions that don't have any interest in what they're doing. So once we start to layer all of those things on top of one another, it becomes complicated because there are so many players involved. The outcome, and we all know this, is that, you know, startups and media companies that have committed sweat equity, money, talent development, they've invested in local communities, have included social media in their strategy and their marketing campaigns. The government, we're here to help bullshit, screwed it up entirely. They misread the room entirely when they implemented C-18. And there's no going back on this now. So
who benefits from this now? Who's benefit? Like, who's thriving? I can tell you, I read a report that nothing happened with Meta. They had the highest quarter they've ever had in their history last quarter. They don't miss us. They don't miss us a bit. So who's benefiting? Who wins right now? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. If you want to kind of designate winners and losers, there's more losers.
Right.
Entirely. And in fact, you know, to your dinner party conversation, Jamie, the folks who are at the other end of it, and I don't say this to be sort of, you know, looking down my nose at anybody, but it's, I don't think people really fully appreciate what it's going to do to their local communities. It's going to be a longer tail to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
But I talked to a guy a couple weeks ago. He's a community activist. And, you know, when you look at things like Metro Land and Metro Media just drying up and blowing away, when there is no local broadcast coverage in the particular area he works in, how am I going to promote my Rotary Club barbecue? Now, that might sound like a small thing to us, but for the purposes of their community involvement and foundational work that they do, it's critical. And now they don't have those voices. So who hurts? Well, probably the people who benefited from the Rotary Club fundraising. So it's really downstream stuff. So I can understand why, you know, nobody's really in the weeds on the legislation, but that's how deeply this is going to go.
Anybody else have final thoughts on C-18? How are we going to fix this? How do we get out?
I think Trudeau has to stop big timing the guys that he can't big time, unfortunately. Can't big time Google, can't big time Meta.
What's big time mean? Wait, what does that mean?
Oh, he's trying to be like, he threw all his cards on the table and said, we have something that is very valuable to you, and if you want it, you have to pay us. And they said it's actually not valuable to us at all. So there's just no leverage there, you know, like that is kind of the issue. Is I think that I genuinely believe that if I go to Google and I go to a news search and I find an article on Global or on CTV from there, and then I click and I go to that website, that was free advertising for CTV and Global. I don't know why they have any problem with Google Archive putting their stuff on a news search, on any searches like that. Facebook, I think it's a bit different because they were using it for their entertainment, but Google was just an advertisement for Canadian media. And they really, I don't know why they did that. I honestly, like, it was the only way. People were not going to ctv.ca, like ctvnews.ca. They were going to Google and typing in a story and then finding the article on CTV and then going to CTV. That's what I did. I think literally everybody I know, that's what everybody did. And so to take it out of that and say, you have to pay us I mean, it's just silly. Google's not paying anybody else. So it just seems silly. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, this
I came in late.
Let me ask the room this. Do you find that and Dad, you're not allowed to answer this. Do you find that you are engaging with the news less often than prior to C-18?
Personally, yes, but only because it's not coming up in crazy stories on Facebook where somebody's like, can you believe Trudeau? And I'm like, I just don't care. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
but I still think that proves the point. So let's say that we're normal people engaging. That Facebook feed, that Instagram feed, that whatever was a source of us becoming, by choice, informed to click something and to read it. I'm finding I I have the New York Times and CBC apps on my phone. I do not have the CTV app. I just haven't, despite them telling me on the radio while I drive to daycare to pick up my kids, I'm not downloading that app.
Totally.
I'm going to TikTok more often.
From the millennial on the team.
Well, I think one of the things that's been forgotten in this whole thing is that time has moved on and that we aren't single sourcing our news anymore. People aren't sitting down at 5 o'clock to watch the news like that is the holy grail of their day, the pinnacle of, or they're not making that appointment at 7 a.m. to make sure they catch that morning newscast. People are getting it from multiple sources because that's the world we live in, right? That's the whole point of social media, is to bring a bunch of voices together. So when we're being culled from that opportunity, then yeah, what happens, right?
You know what's
I
been
also-
fascinating to watch is this Buffy St. Marie story with the CBC on Instagram or on
Yes.
any social media, but especially
Yeah.
Facebook, because people are arguing opinions, but no one's actually going and reading the story. So they're all basing it on a screenshot or something else. And then like they all are forming opinions. And it's like, did you watch the Fifth Estate thing? Well, no, I just know. You're like, okay, like, they're just forming an opinion based on nothing.
They just read the headline and then they
And
formed
they're getting
their
mad
opinion.
about other people getting mad, but it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
nobody's actually for
Well,
the
and the
story.
same thing's happening with the Middle East, right?
Mhm,
Yes.
mhm.
I mean,
Yes.
and we've got demonstrations happening in urban centers across this country, thousands of people showing up.
Yep.
And unless you're drinking the bath water that, is on social media, you have no idea what went on at that demonstration. You had no idea who the good guys were, who was the, sort of the fringe characters, what kind of role they played in all of that. Because, hey, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, you're certainly not getting the CTV or the CBC view of anything that's going on locally, not even just
No.
nationally, right?
Can I
So
just
the-
say something about the Buffy St. Marie thing in particular, because it's not a fast moving story like the Middle East. The Buffy St. Marie thing was fascinating to me from what I'm going to call a whisper campaign's perspective, which is a political tactic. They leaked that story in screenshots ahead of the airing of that show. The CBC has enough weight behind them to put strategy behind getting eyeballs on that show. And then it didn't matter that nobody watched it. So when I go back to my question of who's benefiting from this, it's still the big guys.
Yeah.
Watch how that story unfolded. Watch how it unfolded. People were talking about it before it aired, so it didn't even matter. Like there is so much new dynamic in the Canadian news and information market now that didn't need to be there. And I didn't really want to say that there's no hope right now, but I'm feeling like we need a Princess Leia moment.
Blow up the Death Star.
Yes.
Wow.
I think part of it, honestly, is you got to retrain people a little bit. I pay. I'm an anomaly because I pay for news, I pay for podcasts, I pay for music. Like I pay for stuff when I like it because I want people to keep making it. So, that's kind of what I do. So I pay for The Athletic, I pay for Comedy Bang Bang World, which is a series of podcasts. I pay for I have a huge record collection. Like I pay for music, and it's just that I think you have to start training people that if you like something, you probably have to pay a little bit for it. Like the Toronto Star is the only one that actually does a good job of marketing themselves, because I see stories and I'm like, wow, I really want to read that. And I go there and they give me in a paragraph and it's so heavily locked down that I can't get past their paywall. The only problem is I have paid for the Toronto Star in the past, but they make it so impossible to cancel that it takes like a month to cancel. And I like to be able to cancel stuff if I don't like it. So I've stopped paying them for it. But I do think that we have to retrain people. And unless we do, you're right. The CTV and CBC are the ones that win this because they'll have a ton of money to figure something out to get the word out. So
It's hard when there's also websites out there that exist like where people can enter in those links to articles blocked by paywall and then get past the paywall and read the article without reading it. So there's ways around that.
Told ya. It is a mess. It's a mess on the local level. It's a mess for audiences. It's a mess on the international level. It's a mess for the media business. There's no one throat to choke on this. And it's hard to see who wins. more losers than winners. So huge thanks to my team for contributing to these team eavesdrops. I know you guys like them. I can see they're actually the highest listened to episodes. So yay. This is amazing. We're going to keep doing these. And also a quick note, I plan to do 12 episodes like this, kind of end season 1 and then launch season 2, where I'm going to start to bring in more interviews, one-on-ones with other folks. So stay tuned for that. Big thanks to my team, Dave Trafford, Jamie Nickerson, Andrea Palacio, Drew Garner, Mike Trutler, Jen Hudson, Becky Coles, the whole Story Studio Network team who contributes their thoughts, insights, feelings, and emotions to this media business and to all the work we do at Story Studio Network. Hey, leave the show a review. Subscribe while you're at it over on the Apples or the Spotifys. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Erin Trafford, on Instagram at its.erintrafford. We're also at Story Studio Network. Drop me a line or an email, hello@storystudionetwork.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time.